Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So today we're going to be looking at what I think is one of the best ways to handle styling and CSS across your apps. And this is all size of apps, whether it's small apps or kind of huge enterprise web application. And the absolute best thing about this is you don't need to learn any kind of new technology, any new framework. This is all just from a way of thinking or way of applying what we already know, and it's absolutely brilliant. So if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing, and yeah, let's get right into it. Cool, so the methodology we're looking at today is Cube CSS, and there's a lot of documentation out there, which I'll link below in the description for you to have a read so you can understand the kind of the philosophy, the principles of it. I'm going to go over those philosophies very, very high level now because I'd rather just get right into it and build the dashboard. So very high level, Cube CSS is all about essentially progressive first CSS. So we're starting off at the very top in terms of global styles. So we do as much as we can at the top. We're adding utilities to make life easier for ourselves, and then we kind of go down a few layers until we get to the very low level kind of specific element or component level where you're adjusting very specific CSS things. But by the time we reach that level, 80-90% of the styling is done for us, right? So you'll see what I mean when we get into it. That might be a bit confusing. So yeah, let's get right into it. So this is kind of the main homepage of Cube CSS. I'll link this in the description below. And if we jump into the learning resources here, there's a tutorial called Build a Dashboard with Cube CSS. So this is done by Andy Bell. He's the guy that created Cube CSS. And this is basically the tutorial we're going to be going through. So he does it here in HTML, CSS, or Sass with a couple of tools that he maintains. So we're going to do the exact same, but we're going to be doing it in React. I'm doing it in React just to kind of apply it to a proper application or a bigger application with a framework, but the methodology itself is agnostic to any kind of framework, etc. So the same rules apply. And yeah, I guess we'll go over it in practical terms. I'll explain how it all works as we go along and code it. So we're going to do that from scratch. So I'll click into this, see what you're building, and this is the dashboard that we're building. And it's not it's not the most simple dashboard. It's also not the most complicated, but I think it's a kind of good starting point. A few different elements, colors, and you can see how things kind of respond or how responsive it is or adaptive as well. As we kind of get smaller, you can see that jump there, and then it all fits in the screen quite nicely for a small screen. Perfect. So that's what we're going to be building. Yeah, let's get right into it. So on the left hand side here, I've just created a brand new Create React app. I've removed some of the kind of the boilerplate files here, but all we have is a app.js that says hello world, and I've removed everything from the app CSS styles there and everything from index CSS. So we're starting from scratch. We're going to copy over some of the started files from the tutorial. I'm going to kind of build up on that. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to do npm install node Sass. So we're going to be working with Sass because it helps quite a lot with these projects. So I've already done that. And as soon as you've installed Sass, you can just change these from CSS to SCSS. So I'm going to do that here and here. Just going to refresh that. That should be back to normal. Cool. So just before we get started, I'm just going to copy over some fonts from the start files. So this is just a font file with a bunch of fonts, and we're just going to, I think I can just undo this actually. Yeah. So we're just including the fonts here. It doesn't change anything because we're not using it. So that's just a bit of boilerplate, and yeah, let's get started. So I'm going to copy over the HTML that's provided in the example, and this is the HTML. As is, the only thing I've done here is I've removed all the CSS classes. So I'm just keeping it bare bones for now, and we're going to build on that as we go along. The other thing I need to copy over is the profile image here. And yeah, nothing special going on here. So yeah, let's get started. So like I said, with Cube CSS, we're starting off at the kind of global levels, global level styling, and working our way down. Right. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to simply import or add a reset and some global styles. So I'm going to add a directory here, SCSS. I'm going to copy over a reset file, and you can find this one online on GitHub. It's just a standard modern reset, not been edited at all. So you can find that on GitHub, and then we're just going to import it into our global styles, which is the index CSS file. So reset there. Cool. And if you're wondering what the little underscore there, that's just kind of telling Sass that it's going to be an imported file. So it's a partial kind of CSS file. It's not going to be used standalone. Cool. So reset, that's done a tiny bit for us. And now we're going to add a small amount of global styles. So I'm just going to, again, copy these in and we can kind of walk through them. So there's not much here at all. We're just changing kind of the line heights of the body, overflows. We're updating the font sizes of the headers. And then we're just giving it a consistent focus for the focus selector and a couple of styles on the tables there. So really not much going on. This will obviously depend on the application you're building. For this one, this is enough. Cool. So now that we've added a few global styles, now we're going to add some global utilities. And these are all based around the theme in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over a couple of files here again. And one of these files is basically a bunch of design tokens or a bunch of variables which define basically the theme of this application. So just a bunch of variables that says here's the some colors, here's some spacing, and here's some fonts. And this is just to have kind of a single source of truth for these values across the app, nothing else. And then we have this theme utility CSS, and this is probably one of the kind of the biggest factors in keeping all this CSS easy and simple, which is basically a bunch of utilities all based on the theme. So you can see these are all the colors of the theme, and now we can just take these and add them to the markup, and it's going to do quite a fair bit, and we'll see that in just a moment. So within Cube CSS, U is the utilities, and a utility is just a class that does one thing and does it very well. So you can see each of these classes, they do one thing, single responsibility, changes the color to secondary color, and nothing else. So that's what a utility is, and all these utilities basically describe the theme of the application, right? In the tutorial that Andy does, he's actually got a tool that he maintains that helps kind of generate all these utilities, which is quite cool. In this case, I've just kept it simple, so I'm just essentially copying and pasting all the utilities in. So what you do in theory now is we go back to our app.js. Oh, actually, first we go to our index CSS and we import all the theme utilities. So let's just do theme utilities. So again, we're not using it yet, but now you would go in to your app and you would just add them in. So for example, if I just take actually just the top two lines here. So for example, I would add the top level, we're giving that background color, we're adding a color to all our text, and then we're adding a font. And then on the header, we're giving it a background color, right? So save that. There we go, made some changes already. And the idea is that you go through all your HTML and you basically just apply the theme utilities, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. Here's one I made earlier. So I've just copied and pasted some HTML, and the only difference between this HTML is it's got a bunch of classes on it, which have utilities all coming from the theme utilities. And you can see that it's just given a bit of life to the app already. Again, there's nothing with the layout, etc. This is just basically adapting it to the theme, changing some sizes. And that's basically the very first thing we do. So the next step of Cube CSS is the C. So but just before the C, we're doing global styles. Now we're into the C, which is composition, right? And this is the composition styles. So what the composition styles is basically around how the page flows, how the elements kind of connect with each other, and how they basically interact with each other, right? And again, this is something that we're going to use utilities to help us out with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring over this utilities file. Here we go. We've got these utilities here, each with a different name, each with a different purpose. And again, a utility is something that does one thing and one thing well. So for example, this one is flow utility. All it does is adds spacing to the markup, right, to the elements or the child elements other than the top one, right? And default is 1 rem, but you can override that with this custom property here. We have a splitter element that just assumes you've got 2 childs, and if it's above a certain breakpoint, so that's the kind of the media query here, then it's going to display something flex. We have a wrapper, which is just kind of a container. It's just going to give a max width to wherever it wraps around, and it's going to center it, give it padding as well. And then we have visually hidden here, which all it does is, as it says, hides the element, but in a way that screen readers can yeah, can still read them. So we've got a few utilities here. For this app, that's all we need. And of course, I could go in and apply these classes to the HTML. But what I'm going to do, because I'm in React, what I like to do is I like to create components that wrap around these, and then we can use the components. And I think that just gives you slightly better kind of markup, slightly clearer markup. So when you're looking at the HTML or the JSX in this case, it just makes life a bit easier. So let's go ahead and do that. So first thing, I'm going to import these utilities here. So importing utilities, I've not applied them anywhere yet. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create these components. And at this point, you're essentially creating kind of a small component library. So I'm going to call this component library, and I'm going to bring in the utilities, and I will explain what's going on here. So hopefully this won't be kind of too confusing. So for example, we just look at kind of the flow. So these are all exactly the same pattern. The only difference is the actual class that's been applied. So the general pattern here is we have the component, which matches the utility name. We have this class name, which basically lets you all add any additional classes to this component. We accept a component prop, and basically by default, some of these are div, but of course we want to keep the HTML as semantically accurate as possible, so we let you override this in case it's a different HTML element. And then we're just saying, all right, take all the rest of the props and spread them. And the thing to note is the rest also includes the children prop or the child prop. So that's how this works. It's going to add the children props, so all the children are going to get passed through. And yeah, this combine method, all it does is it takes in the class names, and it just removes any that don't exist. So if it's undefined and null, it just keeps it clean. So it's literally just combining the two. And that's it. So now we can just wrap any element with kind of one of these components, and it's going to work fine. So if we look at what that looks like, if I go to, just here, header, just under headers. If I add this wrapper and I import this guy, you're going to see that there's a bit of padding here, and as this grows, you're going to see that's going to reach a maximum width, and it's going to stay. And simple as that, right? So that basically describes the layout of this. And now I will copy over again the same HTML and the same JSX, but this time I've applied the different utility components. So we've got the flow in a couple of places. We have this visually hidden, which is going to hide the header there, and then we have the splitter up here. There we go. So we import those, we save that. And there we go. So you can see there's a bit more padding around. And the cool thing now is if I expand this, you can see that that's jumped up. And that's kind of, giving it a container. And the cool thing here is we've still not added any kind of custom CSS anywhere, but the style or the flow of it is looking okay. And we close this again, and it's quite responsive, it's quite adaptive, and all the CSS up to now we can reuse in any project. It's nothing specific to this. It's just kind of higher level styles. So we've got up to here now. The next and pretty much the final step is are the blocks and exceptions, and I like to split this up into two. So what I like to do is I like to have kind of reusable blocks, and these are essentially components that you find in a component library, right? And exceptions go along with that. We'll show that in a minute. And then we have the custom blocks, which is fine-grained CSS to fix specific things. So same as before, I'm going to copy over some blocks, and in this case we've got two blocks, which is we have a button block and a pill block, or I guess this is also known as a chip. But you can see the difference between a block and a utility. A block is doing quite a few different things. It's not just focusing on one thing. So it's a few different styles here, and it's using again some variables from the theme as well. And this bit of syntax here provides the E in Cube, which is the exception, right? So what an exception is kind of like a finite state that the block can be in. So in this case, we're saying that you could be one data variant, and one of which is ghost. We can add a few different here, and based off of that state or the exception, we're going to change the styling slightly. So that's what the button's doing here, and then the pill is just kind of pretty straightforward, just adding some styles, giving a default background, and changing the text if it's in English, and that's it. So similar to the utilities, I'm going to import this here, and oops, blocks there. And the final step is I'm going to actually add them into my component library exactly the same way we added the utilities. So exactly the same, no difference other than the class here. So then we can just go into our app.js. I think it's these guys here. So I can replace these A tags with button. And what you can do is you can do here component. Again, you can override this as A, which is exactly what we want. So that's basically going to render an A tag in the underlying HTML. But here it's a button component. So if I save that, that's going to update that perfectly. And then on the top one, this is where the exception comes in. You can add a data variant, and this one's called ghost. Cool. And the final thing here is the pills or the chips. So I think it's all these spans. Rename them with pills. So now that's ready. And we just need to add the import for pill. If I save that, there we go. So just change the buttons, the pills, nothing else there. And now we're on to the final step, which is kind of the custom blocks. And for the custom blocks, I'm not going to add them to the index CSS. I consider all these globals. So now we're getting into actually, hey, the styling, the layout, everything's kind of, the theme is there. But now we just need to fix up a few final things, right? So I'm going to jump into the app.js, go up to the top, and so we've got the app CSS here. So this CSS is specific to this component or to this HTML, and this is where we're going to add all the custom blocks. So I'm going to go over here. Again, I'm going to copy over some CSS. Again, this is reaching into the theme, and we have basically a few, so that's 5 classes, and these classes are going to shape the rest of the app. So site head, it's going to go around the top one. It's providing a bit of padding, and it's giving it a flex and space between, so it pushes everything out to the sides. So that should be kind of pretty straightforward. We have this user class, which is inlining the text here and the user, and kind of making it look like an avatar. Again, this could be potentially a utility if you use it often, but in this case we're just using it once. So that's why it's here. We have this key header, which is this bit of text and these buttons. Again, here we're just so this knows, or this understands, the CSS understands that this is a splitter utility, so understands that it's going to be a flex when it is above a certain breakpoint. So what it does is just fixing up basically the spacing around it, or on its children. We have this table group, which we're going to be adding some borders around, and this is what I meant with overriding the flow space. So it knows that this is a flow, but it wants all the H3 to have a slightly different flow space or margin top than the tables, etc. And then we're adding padding on top of the top elements. We're giving a background to all the odd elements, and then we're aligning the third column here on the right, and then the summary is just simply adding a bit of padding all the way around and changing the flow space again. So these are all kind of custom things, and in here you can kind of go crazy. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these and just kind of apply them and see the changes. So site head goes up at the top, adds a bit of padding. I think it's in here. We can add class name, and we can add the I think this is the site head inner. There we go. So that should solve that. So that just gives that the spacing, and then we've got the user class, which we're going to apply to this div here. So that just, like I said, inlines it. So that's basically the wrapper with the header. So we've got this second wrapper, which has 2 splitters, which is this top one and the second one here. So the top one here is the key header. So we're going to pop in the key header there. That just adds a bit of spacing. And then the second splitter has 2 flows. And you can see here that for me, I really like having this semantic layout. It's easy for me to kind of go through and see where everything is, because I refer to them by the utility. So I know that I've got 2, one big splitter here, which has 2 flows, which is this table and this summary section. So it's really easy for me to kind of see how that goes together. And the flow here, the first one, is going to be the table group. So we add that. You can see that that's done a fair bit with not too much CSS, but yeah. And then finally, the summary. And again, that's just updated some padding and the spacing. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Hopefully that kind of takes care of most of the styling. Yeah, I'll probably point back to, in this example, we've obviously done quite a lot of copy and pasting, so it might seem like a lot, but I think the idea here is that most of what we did up until the kind of the final block section is kind of one-off. You do this at the start of the project, especially with the global styles, and then the utilities and the component library, the blocks, you're going to add to them kind of gradually. They're going to grow over time, but you're not going to be, you know, updating them all the time, but you're going to just be reusing most of those. So really, if we were kind of adding this page and everything was already set up, we'd just be focused on the app CSS, or the kind of the very custom the custom CSS here. So if we added a second page, we could probably reuse the majority of the utilities and the globals here, and again we'll just find ourselves adding very kind of little snippets of CSS as opposed to, you know, heaps of CSS which you usually do. And yeah, hopefully I've done that a bit of justice in explaining it well. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.